coming up.
My question was about the event in Toronto. So both offices here and your offices were responsible for that guest list for that event. I want to know what vetting was done for the guest list where the Prime Minister's office provided an invitation to Mr. Hunka. For that event, what vetting and process was followed to vet guests from that list that your office did invite that included Mr. Hunka?
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Duncan is deliberately and intentionally not heeding to your ruling. You're the chair of this meeting. You have ruled on what is admissible in terms of questioning, and they have to relate to the event that happened in the House of Commons.
Another cover-up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here this morning. In your opening comments, one of the things here is what happened in the House of Commons and having Mr. Hunka recognized that day as being a complete embarrassment internationally for Canada and for our Prime Minister. But one of the other key aspects which neither of you had raised in your comments was also another embarrassing factor was the fact that Mr. Hunka was invited to the other official event that happened during that visit in Toronto. So one of the questions that I want to start off, Ms. Kennedy, perhaps with you is, when we talk about the vetting of lists for the House of Commons being one thing, this could have been avoided by a vetting process as well for the Toronto event where Mr. Hunka was invited to. Could you talk about, for that event, which PCO is responsible for, a partner in, or having lists for, what vetting you do? And Mr. Keir, I'm going to ask you the same question from your office.
Point of order.
Mr. Gerritsen, point of order.
Just for clarity, Madam Speaker, my understanding is that we are studying the issue that happened in the House of Commons. Mr. Duncan is introducing something that happened at another event outside of the House of Commons. Can you provide some clarity as to direction in terms of where we're going?
So I would have to agree that it is about what happened in the House of Commons. The last time there was more leniency given because the House Leader had come and brought in the other events. So they brought in and expanded the scope, so only appropriate we ask questions when they expand the scope, versus I would say our guests are here today to speak about what took place in the House of Commons. I did not hear any reference to anything outside of the House of Commons.
I can get to try to build. I didn't get the first question out, so I'm trying to make a connection.
I think what we're doing is, rather than going too far, Mr. Gerritsen and I would have to agree with him in this case, we're remaining within the incident that took place in the House of Commons, and so witnesses will be allowed to answer as you would please. But I think you've heard the question. You want to just let them see if they want to try to answer?
I'm just going to appeal that if I could, Madam Chair, because what I'm trying to, I couldn't even get done to have the first question answered here, is that the lack of vetting for other events on that same visit by the Prime Minister's office, the PCO, and the Protocol Office, if they'd had, I want to understand what they had for those events. And in the event, the red flags that have been raised about Mr. Hunka and not being recognized should not have been invited, which the Prime Minister's office has acknowledged that the individual we are speaking about should not have been invited to their event. If they had better protocols or what they were, perhaps this would not have happened on the floor of the House of Commons. So I'm trying to correlate very reasonably and very fairly that the official visit here, the chief of protocol is here. They're speaking about the official visit, the entire visit by President Zelensky. It is very relevant to do that. So I'm going to appeal that call and say it's absolutely relevant to try to show how a lack of proper vetting was done in many cases here. There were many opportunities to catch this and we're not.
Okay. I'm going to actually, no. I'm moving on. I've told you where I stand. We know what the motion was. You can reread the motion if you're concerned with it, which members decided to pass. So you are well aware, all of you, what we passed. We spoke about the incident in the gallery of the House of Commons. That is why our guests are here today. You've heard the question, and I would now pass the floor back to our guests to hear their voices as well. Thank you for coming to PROC.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I'll just be clear right up front. PCO was not aware Yaroslav Hunka was invited to the address or part of the Speaker's speech before the Speaker delivered his speech in Parliament. As you have heard, the list of guests invited to an address in Parliament are managed by the Office of Protocol at Parliament. I would just also add that we were requested from PCO to provide a list of 25 government officials who could attend the address to Parliament, which we did in consultation with key departments such as Global Affairs Canada, Public Safety, and the Department of National Defence to collate that list.
Just before, my question was about the event in Toronto. So both offices here and your offices were responsible for that guest list for that event. I want to know what vetting was done for the guest list where the Prime Minister's office provided an invitation to Mr. Hunka. For that event, what vetting and process was followed to vet guests from that list that your office did invite that included Mr. Hunka?
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Duncan is deliberately and intentionally not heeding to your ruling. You're the chair of this meeting. You have ruled on what is admissible in terms of questioning, and they have to relate to the event that happened in the House of Commons. Now, you ruled on that. You made a decision on that. And Mr. Duncan is deliberately ignoring your ruling and trying to continue to engage along that dialogue, despite the fact that he might not agree with your ruling. So I would encourage you to call him to order, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair.
And I've appealed that.
And I've decided against it. So back to
Could we
the
put
report.
the question perhaps to the...
No, I've told you that we
this-
are here. Okay, anybody can throw a tantrum if they'd like. I'm very simple. This is really simple. We are here. What's the reason why we're here today? Let me remind us all. I think I said at the beginning of the committee is meeting today to continue its study of parliamentary protocol related to the incident in the Speaker's Gallery on Friday, September 22nd, 2023. Is there a Speaker's Gallery in Toronto? Yes. Is it a different level of government? Yes. Will elections come for all levels of government? Sure. If that's where the interest lies, go for it. But right now, we're in the nation's capital. We're in Ottawa. The gallery we're referring to is in the House of Commons in Ottawa, and that's why our witnesses are here. So, Mr. Duncan, please remain within the scope of why we're here. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm just going to say here, this is, I say, appeal the ruling, and perhaps if the committee has to take a vote on this and challenge the chair's ruling on this, because I'm going to go back and repeat again of where it is relevant to
There's
the
no
questions.
debate. Challenge the chair. Question, clerk.
I didn't have an opportunity to.
You want to challenge it? Let's go.
Well, I did the first time, and then you didn't call the question, so now you're.
Let's go. We just called the
So
question.
now-
Let's go.
You just asked for
Yeah.
I did the first time, and then
You just said those words. I heard them clearly. The question's
you
been
didn't
called.
challenge.
Vote.
This is,
You said you disagreed with her. You never challenged the rule.
Vote.
Should be.
The question is, shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Can't even ask a question about Toronto.
Ms. Romanato?
The question is, shall it be sustained? Shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Romanato?
Yes.
Mr. Lauzon?
Wait.
Mr. Duguid?
Sustain?
Mr. Gerritsen? Yes. Mr. Hanley?
Sustain.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Ms. Wagenthal?
No.
Ms. Falk?
No.
Mr. Patzer?
No.
Madame Gaudreau? Ms. Matheson? 7 yeas, 4 nays.
I'm not sure what's happening, but we have a 3-hour meeting possibly or up to today. So I'm just going to ask members, if you need a break, I'll give you guys a 5-minute break, but this is not the tone and temperament I'm going to continue with when we've asked witnesses to come. So, Mr. Duncan, are we okay to proceed with why we're here? Because now you've had everything done that you needed. Can we at least focus and let the guests or witnesses provide the information they're here to provide?
I'm just stunned at this, Madam Chair,
Okay,
about
so
how
you-
it's absolutely, so, Mr. Carrier, if in your office, in the department, that you have as chief of protocol for official visits, if in other parts and other events that you host, how do you vet a guest list for other things that you might have within your office for events that you have?
So thank you for the question. So indeed, there are
completely separate processes depending on where the event is. I like to say half jokingly that I'm the Chief of Protocol of Canada everywhere except here, with the possible exception of the PM's corridor upstairs. So the parliamentary guest list was a complete separate from us. Sometimes we feed into those. They'll ask us who to invite from the diplomatic corps to an address or another, and liaise with the visiting delegation on who from the delegation should be invited if not everybody can be invited. But at no point.
But so I can ask
Yeah.
just in general, for for an event that you're responsible for and would do and have a guest list where you send invitations out, apparently now in theory, without saying something specific, another event that you be responsible for the guest list, can you tell me what your office does for vetting a guest list that you're responsible for then?
We don't vet guest lists, Madam Chair. What we do is we get them from the client. The client would be, in this case, either PMO or one of the minister's offices. And they send us a list. Often it's in waves. If you're having a reception or a state dinner of some, you'll do a first wave of invitation, and then depending on the response rate, second wave, third wave, fourth wave. So we don't vet the guests.
For any of the events that you do, for any events that you would host and be primarily responsible for, you just, if somebody provides, an organization provides names, you just automatically from the Prime Minister's office or through both Director of Protocol through the Prime Minister just invite them no matter what.
We get the list from PMO.
PMO.
So we wouldn't accept lists
So,
from.
Ms. Kennedy, in those in the example there, where in your office for what you do there, what do you do for vetting on any events or lists that come out from the Prime Minister's office?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I would just state that Foreign Defense Policy Secretary is very much focused on the policy support to our Prime Minister as he does his international engagements. In the event that we receive invitations and lists for events, what we normally do is just do a cursory review of that list. Our lens is very much on the gender representation of those that would be in attendance. We also ensure that the organizations, if they are on that list, are appropriately invited.
So again, if the Prime Minister is sending an invitation to a Canadian, anybody, to any event, you're just telling me that if some organization provided a list of 15 names that should attend event X, Y, or Z as an official visit or in the diplomatic community, you just take those names and automatically send them out in the Prime Minister's name, inviting to a special event. There's no vetting that's done from a security perspective. But now, Mr. Kerr, you said that you're just provided the list and send it out. But the list comes from the Prime Minister's office. So I'm asking the Prime Minister's office, PCO, what you do for the vetting of those lists before you provide them to be sent out. They're in the Prime Minister's name on behalf of the Prime Minister, and you're telling me that you just, if some group says, here's 15 people we want to invite, you just copy and paste it to be sent out and don't do any vetting on the list.
Madam Chair, PCO does not play a role in sending out invitations. At the request of the Prime Minister's office, we sometimes request that Global Affairs Canada pulls together and collates a list. When it is returned to us, we do that cursory review. However, we do not have responsibility to issue invitations.
When we talk about this visit and what the goals were for this, we mentioned about strengthening relationships between Canadians and Ukrainians in their time of need right now. Would you also agree with me that one of the goals out of this was to be successful would be that there would not be any opportunity for the Russians in their typical misinformation and disinformation campaigns to have something they would latch onto to try to distract from the visit and take away from its success? Would you agree that not providing Russian misinformation campaigns with fodder be a goal to deem this trip successful?
It's more a policy question, but I think we can all agree that not providing Russia with material for disinformation is always a goal for every visit.
Agreed. And sadly, that's what happened out of this international embarrassment back in September. We talk about the overarching goals of what happened, and I think between what was covered in the media, what Canadians and people around the world saw was exactly this incident, and we're trying to figure out how it could be avoided, should have been avoided, and could be avoided in the future. So one of the things, Ms. Kennedy, about vetting maybe this is an opportunity for lessons learned about what we've learned from past mistakes, perhaps, the Liberal government has made. Can you confirm that whenever visits to Canada by a foreign head of state or dignitary or diplomatic mission come, you work on the protocol or events or lists and so forth? But the other way around, when the Prime Minister travels around the world and brings guests with him, do you have a process or do you have a role in preparing those itineraries and agendas and logistics?
Madam Chair, just to confirm the question, it's about the Prime Minister's outgoing visits where he's,
Yeah.
well, for both incoming and outgoing visits, we provide the Prime Minister with the appropriate policy support. We work closely with Global Affairs to develop a recommendation to undertake the visit to begin with. When we go through that process, we look at how our foreign policy objectives could be advanced, but also tangible outcomes that could be derived from such an engagement. From time to time, depending on the time constraints, we do provide some ideas for program elements that could be considered in the context of an outgoing visit.
So let me use the example of the Prime Minister's trip to India a few years ago in his first term in office. We can recall that trip being a disaster diplomatically for many reasons, one of which is that it turned out, we found out afterwards, that the Prime Minister's office invited a known terrorist to be on as part of the Canadian delegation that visited India. Is that correct, that that happened back in the Prime Minister's first term in office?
I was not in my current position at that time.
Well, I can confirm that that did happen. And what I would say is, in terms of the lessons learned, at that point, the importance of guest lists, who the Prime Minister invites either to attend an event when a foreign dignitaries are visiting Canada and having official events in Office of the Protocol domestically, but then also internationally, we found out the international embarrassment that was caused by not vetting guests properly when there are diplomatic missions and international relationship building around the world. So I asked Ms. Kennedy, in your work and any of the things leading up to this visit in the office and the work that you do, from that visit in 2017 where a terrorist was found to be on the Prime Minister's guest list for an official visit to India at that point.
Point of order.
I was actually just going to let Mr. Duncan finish his train of thought because I think it's very disrespectful. When I have stated why we are here today, you have challenged the chair, we've had a vote, and then you're choosing to not only ask questions but answer them for the witnesses. Point of order, Mrs. Romanato.
Yes, Madam Chair, I was just about to say that we've already established that the purpose of this meeting is to discuss what happens in the House. As you said, that was challenged, voted down. We have witnesses before us to discuss what happens in the House, and I'd like us to remain on that subject. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair.
Mrs. Wangenthal?
Thank you, Chair. I think the most important thing I would see that we're supposed to do here today is to ensure that this type of thing doesn't happen and embarrass our Prime Minister over and over again, whether it's due to circumstances within his office or somewhere else. We're talking about Canada's reputation and our Prime Minister's reputation, and the two are linked because we're talking about Canadians
Thank you. So
who
I think
traveled
next
with
time,
the Prime Minister
Mrs.
or
Wangenthal,
were represented
thank
in
you.
the House.
You've made your point. I don't think it's actually a point of order. I would encourage you perhaps next time when negotiations are being passed as to what the committee will be doing, and as somebody, I know you weren't here, but perhaps they have briefed you, the wording is basically exactly what was offered by the Conservative Party. The witnesses who were invited are basically exactly, and there was not, it was not a smooth process as to what was passed in this committee. So members are very well aware as to what took place here.
I understand the motion
We're not having
and
a
how
back and forth.
particular
Thank
it
you.
is, but it requires
I'm going to go back
feedback from
to
other dynamics to make
Mr.
sure
Duncan,
that is done.
reminding you as to the purpose of the meeting.
I have another point of, and I have a point of order.
Mr. Gertzen, you have a point of order?
Going to follow up on that, but no need.
Sorry, I didn't even hear you. Thank
you
you.
did.
Thank you. I'm glad Mr. Patzer is concerned about your points of order. Thank you for all this assistance I'm getting here today. Mr. Duncan.
My point of order to say about the continued reference to the motion that was passed by PROC was on November 21st. I had attempted and trying to attempt unsuccessfully and being blocked from talking about an access to information request that was provided in the media on February the 5th. So when we passed this motion on November 21st, the information was not revealed. I'm trying to raise new information that is very relevant to the individual named in this study that we are looking at and being refused to. So if we're going to reference this November 21st date by PROC, we should also acknowledge that new information has come since that motion was passed in November 21st, and I have every right to be able to raise that and ask questions.
Mr. Gerritsen?
On that point of order, I would respectfully disagree. Mr. Duncan doesn't have the right to do that. What Mr. Duncan has the right to do is to keep within the scope of this motion. He certainly had the right to try to amend the study. The Conservatives could have come forward and said, we would like to now broaden the scope of this study, and the committee could have debated that before inviting witnesses. But when we invite witnesses here who think that the meeting and the study is about one thing and then try to introduce new topics when they arrive, it's unfair to the witnesses. So you've ruled on this many times. You keep getting pushback from Mr. Duncan on this. He's not respecting your role as a chair, Madam Speaker. I would strongly encourage you to ask him to come to order, or perhaps he would not like to participate in the meeting if he's not capable of staying within the rules that you have very clearly laid out.
It's a good day, right? We're on this side of the earth. It's a good day. Okay. I am
And as
going to
another point
ask,
of order,
do we really have to?
Yeah, another point of
Okay,
order.
yes.
Mr. Duncan should tread lightly on the fact that that November 21st meeting was actually in camera. So he might want to be careful about what he says in terms of that particular meeting and what may have or may have not happened within it.
So I'm going to just bring us back, and I offered you a 5-minute break earlier, and it feels like perhaps we need more than a 5-minute break. I am going to remind us as to why we're here today. I am going to remind us, to Mr. Duncan's point of order, that the dates and timelines that were provided within it were satisfied. So the work that the clerk and myself and we do on this side of the room had been satisfied. If there was concerns at that time, they should have been raised at that time. November was quite a bit of time ago. It's actually last year. So right now, we have a little bit more time with Ms. Kennedy, and then we've got a lot more time with Mr. Carrier and Ms. Hudson. And so I'm going to ask you, Mr. Duncan, to complete your time within the scope of the study.
I'll just do a quick point of order to Mr. Gerritsen, but just so there's no, issues with my conduct here, the minutes are public here of what happened. The minutes are published, so I'm not disclosing anything. Look at the minutes.
When we were
The motion that was passed
Yes.
was in
Okay,
the
there's
minutes.
okay, gentlemen, what's going on here today?
Good question.
Okay,
Question.
so let's stay focused.
Great
We
question.
have company who has joined us at PROC. People love coming to Procedure and House Affairs. We love when guests come, as you can tell. And so we're going to stay focused on the scope of the study. And Mr. Duncan has 1 minute and 10 seconds left. So please complete your round, Mr. Duncan.
So I was not able to raise information about Mr. Hunka and things and their relationship and their knowledge of Mr. Hunka through the protocol office and the PCO and PMO in the first round. And now when I'm about to ask my second question, get called a point of order again. But I'm going to ask the question to Ms. Kennedy. There was an international embarrassment with the Prime Minister's visit to India by not properly vetting a guest list, where a terrorist was brought along to the Prime Minister on that diplomatic visit, which was a disaster for that entire trip and many purposes. What lessons were learned and incorporated into this visit where, yet again, guests lists that were provided by the PMO, PCO were not properly vetted and created an international embarrassment? What was done between that India incident and this one to try to avoid this from happening in PCO in the Prime Minister's office? Mr. Kerr, if you want to address that as well, I'd be happy. What new steps have taken since that 2017 incident with a guest list that has come and been tried to be rectified since?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. With regards to the address in Parliament, PCO was not aware that this individual was going to be invited to the address to Parliament, nor was he going to be recognized there. We had no visibility on that. I would also add that given the need to respect the role of parliamentarians and the operations of the House of Commons, there was no other role for the Privy Council office in this situation.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I have no information on 2017. It was not in protocol or on the India desk. What I do know is that I think there are steps that can be taken to avoid another incident like this here at the House of Commons with the Speaker's office. And my understanding is that that procedure has been reviewed, and I'm pretty certain that the committee can find new recommendations to make sure that that doesn't happen again, because that's the incident that made the news, not the Toronto event.
It is. The commentary that's coming from the member is also very appropriate. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for your appearance today. I'm told that there was a lot going on in the first hour of this meeting. I'd like to talk about the process that led to the invitation of Mr. Hunka. It was clear when we saw Mr. Hunka in the gallery, he was sitting where people are generally recognized by the Speaker. Who decided where he'd be sitting? Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. At the Protocol Office, we don't know who gets invited to the House of Commons and who gets recognized. We have a role with two parts of that list. Sometimes there's enough room in the gallery. And who is part of the diplomatic corps here in Ottawa?
Sorry to interrupt you, but normally when there are folks from the diplomatic corps, the protocol office is automatically involved because you reserve a number of spots for members of the diplomatic corps so that the Speaker can acknowledge them. Isn't that correct? Yes, when it comes to the diplomatic corps in Ottawa, yes, that's true. Now, does someone advise you at that point that there were some seats or spots that were not available because the Speaker had reserved those spots for some particular individual? Response: well, everything we do is at the request of the Parliamentary Protocol Office. They say which ambassador or should be invited, but we don't go into the seating arrangements. No, you don't get involved. Also, you don't get involved in the seating arrangements in the House of Commons. You just say we need X number of spots, X number of seats to the Parliamentary and House of Commons Protocol officers. They tell us who's going to be invited, they consult us, and that's where the matter ends. Well, it's my understanding that you weren't consulted as far as Mr. Hunka's invitation was concerned. Now, did you have any dealings with Mr. Hunka's family or himself in any other context? Response: we sent the invitation for the event to Toronto, and I think that you saw that. That was the subject of an access to information request. It was an email sent to his personal address, and we didn't get any response to that. So there was no contact entered into aside from that invitation. And when you transmit that kind of invitation to folks that aren't members of the diplomatic corps, who do the requests come for those invitations? Well, they come from the client. For example, the PMO's office or other ministers' offices or global affairs. And it's the PMO's office and the Ukrainian Congress that had put that name forward to the PMO's office. Now, how is it that an individual who hasn't responded to a protocol request actually gets to take part in this kind of event? I know it's complicated. You have a name, you submit that name, but how could that individual have taken part at the end of the day at the event in Toronto? Well, Madam Chair, there are two very separate and distinct processes, as I alluded to earlier.
En français, maintenant, Madame
Madam Speaker, whether it's in French or English.
Duncan was doing, and now he's just doing it in French. So I think that it would be, perhaps he just arrived back at the meeting. You want to update him on your previous rulings that you've already made at this committee meeting.
Sur ce point d'ordre.
On that point of order, Madam Chairperson, all I'm doing is tacking on to Mr. Carrier's response. I didn't raise the specific issue of Toronto myself. Mr. Carrier cited the incident in Toronto, so I'm asking questions on the basis of his question. I didn't raise the issue myself. I'm just wanting an answer to my question since Mr. Carrier is the one who first spoke about that incident. So I think it's well within my rights, since he put the issue on the table, to continue with my round of questions, if I may, Madam Chair.
So I'm going to say, in this situation, as somebody who's listening to it, just to bring you up to speed, Mr. Berthold, we did have a conversation at the beginning just to stay focused on it. I do have to agree with Mr. Berthold because it's a little bit different when it's a line of questioning. And so when there's a line of questioning and there's some spaces, doors being opened, you sometimes have to walk through them. But I would just say we have had a very tense meeting already, and it was nice to see you. So I'm really happy that you're here. So thank you for coming. And so I would just ask that we try to just, yeah, okay. But I agree with you, yes.
Je vais juste terminer là-dessus, Madame la Présidente, parce que moi...
Well, I'll just close on this particular issue. My time is running out in any event. Mr. Carrier, how is it possible? Could you explain this to me? If I want to bring someone to a protocol event and I don't have an invitation for them, well, then they won't get the invitation. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Now, I raised the event in Toronto because the member had asked me whether my office had had any contact with Mr. Hunka. And as I said, these are two very separate and distinct processes. The Toronto invitation was the purview of my office, from the PMO's office at the recommendation of the Ukrainian embassy, and they didn't respond to that invitation. Now, as far as the invitation to the House of Commons is concerned, I have no further information on that because we are not involved in any way whatsoever in that process. And as I explained earlier, we were asked questions about the diplomatic corps and about the delegation, and we never see the complete list at the end of the day.
Désolé.
Sorry about that.
Bien fait, Mr. Berthold.
Well done, Mr. Berthold. Thank you very much again.
Gerritsen, 5 minutes to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for being here. If I understood you correctly in your opening statement, you said that your role for protocol is everything basically outside of this building, with the exception of maybe a hallway or something. Is that true?
Yeah, so the parliamentary protocol is in charge here on the Hill. But we do, upstairs, the PM's corridor, they call it, where the PMO is, in the cabinet room.
But you certainly don't have jurisdiction, or for lack of a better term, jurisdiction over the chamber.
No.
But yet you're here
absolutely not.
as a witness on a study that we're doing on something that happened in the chamber. I think we have kept you here long enough. We are starting to ask the same questions and get the same answers. So I appreciate your time here and everything that you do. But Madam Chair, I think that with that, I would move that we adjourn the meeting.
Another cover-up?
Yeah.
Oui.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui, merci.
Madame Fortier.
Oui, merci.
Mr. Duguid.
Yes.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
We must be getting somewhere, so no.
Hey, commentary.
Monsieur Berthold.
Sûrement non à une autre opération de camouflage.
No, on a...
Mr. Patterson.
No, not when it's another cover-up.
No.
Ms. Wagenthal.
That's great.
No, sorry. No.
Hey.
Madame Gaudreau.
J'aurais aimé ça l'expliquer, mais c'est non.
I would have liked to provide an explanation, but I'll stop at no.
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Meeting adjourned. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.